Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for coming for this GFMD site event on extending social protection to migrant workers in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. Before I proceed, we have interpretation in Arabic, English, and French. And please choose the language that you want in the interpretation channel. Yeah. Okay, so my name is Sumita Krishna, and I am the director of Our Journey. It's a civil society based in Malaysia, and I'm also the chairperson of Migrant Forum in Asia. I will be moderating this session today, and I would like to welcome all of you to the site event organized by International Labour Organization, ILO, and the Executive Bureau of the Council of Ministers of Labour in the Gulf Cooperation Council, and in partnership with the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation and Migrant Forum in Asia. So we welcome all of you here today. This will be the flow of the session. We will have opening remarks, and thereafter we'll have a presentation on a research, and then we will have six panelists, and finally interventions from two persons. And then we will have, if time permits, then we will have Q&A. Yeah. So could I invite, for the opening remarks, Ms. Shara Razari from ILO to take the floor. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure for me to be here this afternoon with all of you, and with huge thanks to our co-partners in organizing this important side event on a topic that is, I believe, timely, critical for the world, and something that we as the ILO are highly committed to. I think we would all be very aware of the fact that our economies and societies, in no matter where we are, rely heavily on the work of millions of migrant workers who are contributing to the way in which our households, our factories, our fields, services function, and in a way helping us make dynamic economies and have societies that are functioning well and inclusive. And for many of these millions of migrant workers, unfortunately, access to social protection remains, to this day, in the 21st century, a major challenge. We all know that in the context of changing labor market realities, the COVID crisis that we've just, all been living through, as well as the kind of environmental challenges that the world is facing, the importance of social protection for migrant workers is an issue that will only increase in intensity and in criticality as time moves on. Now, I think for the ILO, this issue of ensuring equal rights for migrant workers is one that has been there since the founding days of the organization in 1919. The preamble to the ILO Constitution recognized the importance of, and I'm quoting here, protection of the interests of workers when employed in countries other than their own. Back in 1919, and now, the importance of that right, I think, is there, and we know that there are always millions of workers who are working in countries that are not countries of their own. Now, to fulfill this mandate, ILO has adopted over many decades important conventions and recommendations that provide a very solid legal framework and foundation and very useful guidance for countries to extend social protection. And these important standards that we have, the conventions and recommendations, really have within them this very important principle of equal treatment for migrant workers and their families in respect of social security. So the right to social security is something that is strongly anchored in these ILO conventions and recommendations, which are also our global legal frameworks. This is not just ILO conventions. These are international labor standards. Now, even though I think there has been progress in many countries The challenges of extending social protection to migrant workers are very evident. And I think many of us saw these challenges in a very brutal and painful way during the COVID crisis, when migrant workers really struggled to get access to some of the most basic benefits that should have been available to them. Now, in the GCC, the substantial share of migrant workers in the workforce, which can be really, really high in some countries, and we'll hear about the numbers, implies a need to really be able to better understand the kind of state of social protection coverage for migrant workers at this moment, what the data tells us, what the evidence base is, and also the factors that are really determining the level of coverage, and very often factors that may be driving that exclusion and lack of access to both legal and effective coverage. We also know that whatever policies we have, whatever legislation we have, needs to be informed by good data, good evidence, and scientific kind of information base. And I think it's in that light and that context that this ILO project on extending social protection to migrant workers, exploratory research and policy dialogue in the GCC countries, really gains its significance in that context of having whelmed policy dialogue and policy and legal change. In this project, it examines the extension of social protection for migrant workers in the Gulf in accordance with the international social security standards that we have, by promoting research, informing social dialogue, and also supporting the reform efforts that are ongoing. And here I would really like to underline the support that we've been getting from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation in this endeavor, which has really been very forward-looking and I think ahead of its times. Now, the ILO strategy on extending social protection to migrant workers, refugees, and their family members really has at its heart this aim of ensuring that countries progressively build their social security systems and include the rights of migrant workers and their families. And that in doing so, we really promote a kind of participatory discussion and approach, which is grounded in the labor standards that we have, our common labor standards, but also that is anchored in social dialogue. And by that we mean the participation, of course, of representatives of employers and workers in addition to governments, but also that we have representation from migrant workers themselves who can really give us a sense of what the reality on the ground is, and the factors that migrant workers struggle with when they try to access, even when there is some legal recognition of those rights. The level and scope of social protection provision in countries of origin and destination obviously has a big impact here, but also we need to bear in mind the specificities of the sectors in which migrants are working. So we really need to ground that policy and legal discussion in the realities that migrant workers face. And here I want to recall also the importance of the ILO Social Protection Floors recommendation that was adopted in 2012, recommendation 202, that also recognizes the importance of social security as a right for everyone. I will end now because I just have 1 minute and I know that we have to stick to time. I think the reforms across the Gulf region are increasingly granting migrant workers legal access to a limited range of social protection benefits, and that's how we build those comprehensive systems step by step. These new signs of change and reform momentum, I think, are representing a really important shift in a very strategic and important part of the world where the weight of migrant workers is quite significant. And we believe that these changes that governments are adopting, together with employers and workers' organizations, could really bring benefits, not only in securing the right to social protection for migrant workers, but also we strongly believe that this will bring benefits to the economies and societies, to employers, as well as workers. However, I think we're very conscious of the gap in social protection access, which is stark. And we know that there's often a gap even between legal rights, de jure rights, and effective implementation of those rights and access. So translating laws into practice is a huge endeavor. And everyone here has a role to play. Civil society organizations, diplomatic missions, of course, governments and workers and employers organizations in countries of origin and destination, in order to be able to really take these steps that countries are taking forward and make sure that they are solid and they can be sustained in every way. And here I just want to end by saying that ILO stands ready to support GCC countries in their journey to improving both legal and de facto protection of workers, to give policy advice where is needed, technical support, knowledge management, and so forth.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace of God be upon you. I am pleased to address you in this side event that is held in margin of the forum in its 14th session. I would like to seize this opportunity in order to address my greatest thanks to the colleagues in ILO, represented here by the regional office for Arab states, and I thank them for the coordination and cooperation with us, and for organizing also this session to present the results. Dear participants, we all agree that the challenges that we are facing in the labor markets are very wide and also ramified, and add to this also all the complications due to the economic crisis, pandemics, as well as the climate change and other problems. We all agree also that the social protection constitutes one of the main and most important pillars that are the basis for the good and sustainable labor relations and secure relations, and this subject has become one of the top priorities for the governments as well as the international organizations, namely after all the gaps that were discovered in all the systems of social protection during and after COVID-19 pandemics. And I would like to quote here the report of the ILO regarding the social protection for the year 2020 to 2022, the 2-year report. It mentions that all the areas of inequalities, and the great gaps in the level of comprehensiveness, as well as the systems for social protection, as well as the disparities with the social protection in the regions and in the countries have become more than clear. I end the quotation. I would like also to mention, as the report says, in the ILO that there are more than 4 billion people without any protection at all, while 47% of the world population has only 1 unit of subventions, social protection subventions. And this is why it was very important to reinforce social protection and to guarantee all the sustainability in the labor market. In this context, the GCC countries were not far from this importance given by the whole international community. Starting with the COVID pandemic, COVID-19, the executive board of the Council of Ministers of Labor in GCC countries was mandated to work on social protection in the state of the GCC, as while giving a lot of importance also to the end of service indemnities that comprehend all the social protection. Ladies and gentlemen, dear brothers and sisters, the executive board of the Council of Ministers of Labor and Social Affairs in the GCC countries is considered to be the right arm and the technical arm for all the ministries of labor in the GCC countries. It always strives to contribute with the countries to tackle all the gaps and in the labor markets, and in order to correct them and In light of all this, with an initiative from the Ministry of Human Resources in the UAE, there was a partnership established with the ILO represented in the Regional Bureau of Arab States in order to examine and study all the biggest gaps in the social protection system, as well as the impacts on all the labor relations in order to bridge such gaps. And throughout this decade and during last year, we have organized two workshops in order to tackle this problem, and as a result, three countries from the GCC, the UAE, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the Sultanate of Oman ended up giving the end of service indemnities. And despite the fact that every single state from the GCC countries has adopted a different pattern that is compatible with its legislative as well as procedural context, as well as its economic directions, it has followed the main objective being the fact that paying the end of service indemnities has become the most important subject and the clearest for the governments and the authorities in order to guarantee these indemnities and to pay them. Ladies and gentlemen, the pattern followed by the GCC countries for the last 10 years is based on a conviction that its policies and strategies aiming at restructuring the economy and reinforcing the reconstruction and the diversification of income sources, and while striving to relying on the energy sources that are conventional in order to become pillars in this and pioneers. This is impossible. It cannot be implemented unless we develop all the labor markets, and there is also a legislative reinforcement in order to guarantee a sustainable labor market that can face all the crises and all what happens in the region. Luckily, such convictions constitute the pillar of the interest of all the authorities in the GCC countries, including employers and workers. Based on all this, the executive board, with the support of all the ministries of labor in the GCC countries, in partnership with the Regional Bureau for Arab States, is ready to tap all the improvement and the modernization of the and the upgrading of the social protection system to make sure that it is comprehensive and complete. And we would like to mention here the improvement of the social security system in the Sultanate of Oman. This was achieved thanks to the cooperation with the ILO. And in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to reconfirm the readiness of the Bureau of the GCC countries, the Ministerial Bureau, that has made all efforts and spared no efforts to work on this matter to have all the positive impacts. I thank you for your kind attention, and may the peace of God be upon you.
Thank you, everyone. This was off script, and this is a beta version of first screening of this video. Of course, needs a bit of fine tuning, but we thought since we're all here, might as well use the opportunity. So we will now start like a very short presentation that tries to give some of the findings of research that has been done for the past 2 years and a half. Most of this research has been done in collaboration with ODI, and this is why I have my colleague Jessica with me to present. Just to go quickly, I will cut my presentation, and just to say that maybe just go through this quickly to say that this tries to map the entitlements of migrant workers in the private sector in the GCC, and this is the first time that such a mapping has been done. And it tries to show in color codes where migrant workers have social protection, and the codes reveal the different financings. So you can see when there is white cells, and you can see that this part is dedicated, the second part of the box, to migrant workers. The white cells shows where there is no social protection. The light blue shows where there's employer liability, and as we saw in the video. And we saw that this is a predominant type of social protection. The red shows mandatory private insurance, and we can see that it's concentrated in this row where it shows medical care privatization, and we know that this has several limitations of fragmentations and increasing the cost. And we can see also the second darkest blue, which is the code for contributory social insurance schemes, which we can see also that are limited on that part. However, when we see there's a column of this color, that would refer to the Sultanate of Oman, where groundbreaking reforms have recently extended social insurance to migrant workers. And our esteemed speaker, Mr. Hashim Hashimi, is here with us today to tell us more about it. But quickly, just to say that recently, in July, actually, of this year, Oman enacted a new social protection law that includes migrant workers and in protection for maternity, paternity, sickness, and employment injury insurance. It also established a national provident fund for end-of-service indemnities, and I'm sure we're going to have time to discuss this. But of course, other countries in the region have been doing a lot of reforms, and we see that recently Bahrain also has replaced end-of-service indemnities with contributions to the social insurance. This happened a few months ago. The UAE also has enacted voluntary pensions as alternatives to end-of-service indemnities, and the Assistant Undersecretary has discussed it here in this room in the side event sponsored by the UAE. So our report reviews such reforms against principles of social security standards, mainly universality, adequacy, comprehensiveness, and sustainability of such schemes. I wanted to go through a bit the drivers and enablers of reforms, but you can find this in our report. I prefer to leave the floor to Jessica to tell us more about effective access rather than legal access that we have discussed. The floor is to you, Jessica. Thank you.
Yeah. So our starting point was really that pretty positive and improving picture of legal access to social protection. And then we compared that to effective access in practice. So let me start with the headline finding. We found that there are significant gaps between the social protection provisions enshrined in the legislation and migrant workers' actual access to such provisions, although the picture is more favorable in some areas than in others, as you'll see. In the remaining presentation, I'm going to focus on three contingencies where migrant workers have strong legal entitlements: health coverage, employment injury, and also end-of-service indemnity benefits. And I will draw on the different components of our research, including a survey with 1,000 Nepalese returned migrants who had previously worked in the GCC, alongside qualitative interviews. And we focused on Nepalese returned migrants because they're one of the key nationalities working in the GCC. As I'm sure you all know, migrant workers from different countries of origin tend to have somewhat disparate experiences and access to social protection. So while the findings of the Nepal survey are indicative of broader trends, they're not directly transferable to other nationalities. Okay, so starting with de facto access to health. At present, on paper, migrant workers employed in the formal private sector are entitled to health insurance coverage funded by their employer throughout the GCC, except in the 5 Emirates of the UAE. And our research found that while access to health insurance systems seems to have generally improved over the past decade, we also saw that even if migrant workers are covered by a health insurance policy on paper, this does not necessarily translate to actual access to medical care and practice. So coming to the Nepal survey, which you now see on the screen, we found that on average, 74% of respondents reported that they had registered for health insurance or another coverage for medical care when they worked in the GCC. So that presents a fairly positive picture, confirming the general trend towards improvement of migrant workers' registrations for health coverage in recent years. Breaking this data down by gender shows that only 51% of women migrants were registered for health coverage compared to 76% of men. And we also saw that high-income migrants in the sample had significantly higher registrations for health coverage than those with lower incomes. Okay, so coming to employment injury. So there are provisions for employment injury in national and regional labor laws in the GCC, which give migrants the right to receive medical treatment at the employer's expense after suffering a workplace injury. And generally, employers also have to pay their salary for a certain period during recovery or while undergoing treatment. And in some jurisdictions, employers are also required to pay compensation if the accident results in a disability or death. And trends for employment injury in practice show that de jure provisions are frequently not respected, both due to lack of awareness, but also neglect, with provisions often only being observed when they're not too onerous on the employer. Our analysis showed that the costs of the treatment tend to be paid in many cases, but that the employment injury compensation is frequently not paid. And we also saw this in the Nepal survey. 1 in 6 of those who had an accident reported that their employer paid for the full cost of treatment, with a quarter reporting that they paid for the entire cost themselves. And the graph here shows that a third of these respondents reported that they did not receive any wages or only partial wages during recovery. So this again indicates some non-compliance with legal provisions. So finally, on end-of-service indemnity benefits, which, as you've heard, are the key provision for migrant workers in many of the GCC countries. The exact terms of service vary by country, but all require that a contract is completed before migrants receive their benefits. In our research, we found that end-of-service benefits are often not paid or delayed or paid only partially, especially in cases where companies face financial difficulties or bankruptcy, and this was quite common in the COVID-19 pandemic, as was already alluded to. And evidence from across the GCC indicated that employers often try to avoid paying end-of-service indemnity benefits with only few repercussions. In the Nepal analysis, we looked at those who had finished their contract in the GCC, so they were all eligible for end-of-service indemnity benefits. And as you can see in our graph, only half of them actually did receive these benefits. And the rate of workers who did receive the end-of-service indemnity benefits was especially low for female migrants, who only received their benefits in 30% of the cases, and also for low-income workers. And given that this is the main provision migrant workers of all types are entitled to across all countries, de facto coverage is very low, suggesting quite high levels of non-compliance. Okay, so we've given you a whistle-stop tour of some of the insights we've produced in the past few years. In our reports, of course, we also laid out detailed policy recommendations. They include steps to improve de jure protections as well as access in practice. And none of this will be possible without strengthening dialogue and collaboration. So please take a look at our publications and the project page for more detailed findings. Thank you.
Of course, in the beginning, I would like to thank all the colleagues at the ILO for their cooperation and collaboration in this side event. There are several factors that have contributed towards these changes and trends in social protection in the GCC countries. The first factor is the will in the ministries of labor and the political will and commitment to restructure the economy in the GCC countries. These requires new strategies, new visions, development visions in the countries of the region, and this requires a reform of the labor market. This has contributed in one way or another in this reform, including the reform of the social protection systems. There's another factor, and that is there is a willingness to achieve a balance between migrant workers and national and local workers. Everyone knows that there is a discrepancy and inequality between the two, especially in terms of cost borne by the employers between migrant workers and local workers.
and therefore including migrant workers and social protection systems will lead to more equality and will bridge the gap in the costs between migrant workers and local workers. The third factor that have contributed to these changes and reforms in social protection systems is the interests and relations between employers, governments, and employees. It is in the interest of governments to have a sustainable and stable work and labor market. During the COVID pandemic, it turned out that the a non-payment of end-of-service indemnities has led to a lot of problems in the funds and will lead to a lot of burdens for employers and governments and will lead to a crisis from time to time. So there was an interest also to give employers and workers their rights without any delays. Of course, the COVID pandemic has been a catalyst that have sped up the pace of these reforms. I would like to talk about the Sultanate of Oman that has adopted the end of service indemnity as well as other benefits and entitlements. And we hope that this will be an incentive for other GCC countries to provide more entitlements and benefits to migrant workers. And like the Director General mentioned, there's a lot of collaboration with the ILO and the other organizations. And we hope to be able to benefit from the experience of the Sultanate of Oman to look at the challenges that they face and how they were able to overcome these challenges and replicate this experience in other countries. There's also the experience in the UAE or Bahrain to bridge the gap between the countries of the GCC. Finally, I would like to talk about the role of international labor standards in this regard. The studies prepared by the colleagues at the ILO with the collaboration of ODI, and they have shared with us in the previous period, will be the basis, and they are based on international labor standards. And we need to use that in order to try to replicate these experiences in other countries at the legislative and practical levels in order to respect these standards that were set up by the ILO. Of course, this requires time, especially that we are talking about organizing labor markets that include a large number of workers. There will be a lot of challenges in organizing these labor markets, and the challenges will vary from one country to the other, from one region to another. And the main question is, to what extent can the countries of origin work with the countries of destination? And we need to look to the future and see how we can make these social protection schemes more comprehensive and link them to national provident funds. Colleagues at the ILO talked about Nepalese workers who are getting some sort of social protection. Perhaps we can link this experience with the experience of Filipino workers who benefit from some kind of protection. Of course, this will require a lot of effort, a lot of coordination. There's a lot of political aspects to these matters. But if we are able to achieve this vision, and if we have a real commitment between the countries of origin and destination, and if we have the necessary legal framework, I think we can move from a phase of simply including migrant workers into social protection to extending the social protection to become more comprehensive in the countries of origin and destination in such a way that the migrant workers, after they leave the GCC countries, they can continue to benefit from these entitlements and they can get a retirement salary, for example, instead of simply an end-of-service indemnity to meet their needs. And this is all for now. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, it's a pleasure and honor to be here with you to share the experience of Oman. Recently, we have issued the new reforms to obtain unified social protection systems to be covered for both Omani and non-Omani, which cause a significant step towards inclusivity and equity between both. Migrant workers in Oman receive a high attention in Oman here. And as you hear that, we have a huge experiment, a huge shift here. It will be started from July 20 in this year. We will start by some benefits, activation of some benefits. One of them is the paid sick leave, paid benefits, and maternity and paternity leaves also. The saving schemes here, it's a mandatory schemes. It's targeted to Omani and non-Omani. For the non-Omani, it will be mandatory to be covered, and it will cover several benefits, as I said, including sick leaves, unusual leaves, work injuries, and occupational diseases. All of that benefits it will be covered, and also the end of services. Also, it's the one of the main pillars that will be covered, and we are expecting that after the implementation or as a consequences of the implementation of such schemes, there is some changes that we are expected to be happens in Oman, particularly for the migrant workers and for the economic. I can list all of them in 4 main pillars. Firstly, we can obtain an enhanced security and well-being by implementing a set of those branches. As I said, sick leave, paid sick leaves up to 182 days. And this is there is a contribution. It should be obligated by the employer up to 9%. Also, we will have maternity and paternity leave, 98 for the maternity and 7 days for the paternity. And here the contribution it will be 1%, and of course all the contribution percentage should be obligated by the employers, not by the employees. Also, the branches, insurance branch against work injuries and occupational diseases, it will be reflecting as a compensation, and at the contribution it will be 1%. Also here we are expecting to provide decent working conditions which can be represented in the acknowledgements toward the human cost and the promote fair treatment by ensuring access to the health care. Also, there is also alignment on agreement with the Ministry of Labor. The Social Protection Fund is working together with the Ministry of Labor to secure or to make it easy access for the public or health care facilities. And there is certain regulations that enforce the employers to cover all the expenses or expenditure of the health that's required for the employees. Similarly here, as we are expecting to improve the labor mobility and retention, especially the skilled migrant workers. Also, it will enhance the resilience and alleviations of the poverty, and this can be achieved by allowing the workers to plan for their future and to build resilience through the saving schemes that I mentioned before. So this is a brief. Actually, it's a huge shift, a huge experiment. It needs lots of hours, or days maybe, to explain it and to show it. And this is only just a brief of that. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fellow panelists, esteemed colleagues, and honorable participants, good afternoon to everyone. I wish to express my heartfelt appreciation to the International Labour Organization and Migrant Forum Asia for graciously extending an invitation to me to participate in this occasion. It is definitely a distinct honor to address you today and engage in these proceedings. The focus of my discourse revolves around the Philippines' unwavering commitment to extending social protection to our migrant workers in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. I will delve in both the promising social labor reforms actively promoted and successfully implemented in certain countries, as well as explore additional avenues for reform currently under consideration. The Department of Migrant Workers, which we regard as the home of our overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs, is the primary agency within the executive branch of the Philippine government that shoulders the primary responsibility of safeguarding the rights and advancing the welfare of Filipino workers and their families. It is actually the youngest department in the Philippine government, having been established on December 30 of 2021, or only 2 years back. In executing its mandate, the department formulates, plans, coordinates, promotes, administers, and implements policies while devising systems for regulating, managing, and monitoring overseas employment of Filipino migrant workers. Additionally, the department addresses the reintegration of OFWs, aligning its efforts with the national development programs. So when we enact policies, we are very much mindful of the full cycle reintegration, full cycle stage of migration, which is very much enshrined in all the different international commitments that we have.
You let them know when you want to change the slide.
Yes, I will. Within the policy and international cluster of the department, which I serve as the assistant minister, our primary responsibility is collaborating with international counterparts and other Philippine government entities. Our central focus lies in negotiating treaties, accords, compacts, and international instruments related to labor migration. This pivotal function forms the bedrock of our commitment to providing comprehensive social protection for overseas Filipino workers, extending beyond the GCC countries to encompass the entire world. Reflecting on past scenarios and experiences, we recognize the necessity to move beyond reactive measures during unforeseen changes in geopolitical, economic landscapes, or natural calamities within host countries. In the past, we often resort to a patchwork approach in addressing the concerns of affected Filipino workers. Deployment bans are imposed, then lifted in response to evolving circumstances, only to be reinstated should another issue arise. The department aimed to find a sustainable solution that begins with the negotiation process of new and existing bilateral labor agreements. It then became a standard practice for us to ensure that every bilateral labor agreement incorporates key institutional provisions within the areas of incorporation. Thus, when we negotiate labor agreements, we make it a point to incorporate in those labor agreements our international commitments, such as fair, ethical, transparent and sustainable recruitment practices, facilitation of information exchange between parties, discussions on recognition of skills, qualifications, education and training credentials through a mutually agreed upon system, and providing access to the necessary measures for legal assistance and social protection for workers. Initiatives for enhancing professional and technical capacity building, supporting anti-illegal recruitment and human trafficking activities, as well as aid programs for the full cycle reintegration of returning workers are also integral institutional provisions. This approach aimed at cultivating a more proactive and comprehensive strategy is key to achieving a stable and predictable framework. Embedding these provisions at the negotiation stage establishes a robust foundation for protection of the rights and welfare of our overseas Filipino workers. Furthermore, the department promotes labor reform initiatives in international negotiations consistent with the fundamental and technical ILO conventions in the UN Compact on safe, orderly, and regular migration. These initiatives, implemented in some GCC countries, address the burgeoning demand for skilled labor and include measures such as 1. Formulation of a technical working group that meets regularly to discuss pressing issues and concerns between the parties. 2. A blacklisting and whitelisting mechanism of recruitment agencies and employers. 3. A country-specific standardized employment contract. 4. Automated recruitment processes. 5. The signing of a memorandum of understanding on combating trafficking in persons. As you can see on the right side of that screen, these were the measures that were actually implemented specifically to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a condition for the lifting of a deployment ban in 2022. For the vulnerable workforce sector, such as domestic workers, negotiations also includes the deployment of a qualified welfare desk officer or counselors. And as I have mentioned, the implementation of these labor reform initiatives is currently underway in several Gulf Cooperation Council countries, setting the benchmark for our negotiation standards with other nations. Our objective through institutional provisions in BLAs and the negotiation of labor reform initiatives extend beyond protection and advancement to cultivating a positive and mutually beneficial relationship with host countries. Through collaborative endeavors, we aspire to create an environment where the dignity, the rights, and the welfare of overseas Filipino workers are consistently upheld and safeguarded. While significant strides have been made in protecting our OFWs, we acknowledge that there is a constant need for improvement. Proactively identifying reform areas, the department integrates innovative solutions into our social protective framework. Current focus include reviewing the compensation package, particularly for vulnerable sectors such as domestic workers, and reducing employment contract durations for domestic workers from 2 years to 1 year, extendable with the mutual consent of the employer as well as the domestic worker. Additionally, the department is renegotiating bilateral labor agreements, incorporating provisions for cooperation such as compulsory and enhanced pre-departure orientation seminars or PDOS in the Philippines and the post-arrival orientation seminars or PAOS in host countries, importantly soliciting inputs from the host countries, end of service indemnity, crisis assistance, mandatory provision of insurance such as medical, long-term, disability wages and other claims for insurance, and a 24-hour assistance mechanism for household service workers. Moreover, beyond negotiating and concluding labor agreements, the department consistently evaluates its effectiveness through regular joint committee meetings with host countries. These sessions aim to assess the implementation of agreements, recommend solutions for any disputes arising during implementation, and ensure ongoing collaboration. We always believe that there should be a negotiation and mutual consent between the parties rather than a unilateral imposition of measures. In addition, the department employs a monthly technical working group mechanism as a structured platform for transparent communication with foreign counterparts. This proactive approach facilitates the identification, discussion, and resolution of immediate concerns, preventing potential issues from escalating and fostering a collaborative environment for effective problem solving. In conclusion, extending social protection to our overseas Filipino workers, particularly in GCC countries, is not merely a legal or moral obligation. It reflects our values as a nation. The Department of Migrant Workers is resolute in continuing to champion the rights and welfare of our OFWs, ensuring that they are not just economic contributors but ambassadors of the Filipino spirit, revered and protected wherever they may be. In closing, I extend my deepest gratitude to all the delegates for your meaningful contributions. Let us carry the momentum of this collaboration forward, fostering stronger ties and achieving shared goals. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mario.
Thank you very much. On behalf of African Union Commission, we would like to first of all appreciate and thank ILO for the dynamic cooperation that we have with ILO, but also for the mutual trust and common recognition of the importance of partnerships in dealing with such issues as social protection in the context of labor migrants. As indicated, my name is Sabelo Mbogazi. I'm the head of labor employment and migration at the African Union. The subject that we are discussing this afternoon, colleagues and gentlemen and the fellow panelists, is strongly, at the AU perspective, it's strongly predicated on a number of AU policy frameworks, such as Agenda 2063, Migration Policy Framework, and a number of them. Just to respond to your question, Madam Moderator, yes, we have recognized that in the recent past, since 2000, migration from African Union member states to GCC countries has increased. So there is evidence on this. And recent migration trends shows an increase from all the AU member states, but also increasing trends are particularly influenced by economic factors, demographic factors, and climate change. And therefore, it is a distinct honor for AU to provide its perspective here. But we see some few challenges when we do the policy analysis from the AU. We see that 70% of the world population, including migrant workers, do not have access to comprehensive social protection. So we have identified that as a challenge, but also ILO has provided some statistics estimating that 17% of the population receives at least one social protection benefit compared to the 47% of the global average. That is the Africa statistics, Africa scenario. So that is the picture. But then the other issue is that migrant workers particularly face legal and practical challenges in accessing their rights to access social protection. So the approach of the African Union, when we're looking at all these challenges and the deficit in the access to social protection, the challenge of the approach of the African Union is to provide assistance and policy advice to our member states. But as we know that migration and labor migration is a global phenomenon, and therefore we also work with other regions like the GCC also to look at the viable solutions, particularly to extend protection to the labor migrants. And therefore, the AU has come up with several frameworks that will support member states, but that will also serve as a policy guidance that we use to engage with the international community, to engage with other regions, for instance, the GCC and Europe. So AU has come up with the AU protocol on social protection that is adopted by member states, and we anchor our policy advice and negotiations with other regions based on this AU protocol on social protection. But also the migration policy framework provides an inspiration and provides some strategic areas for that guides the discourse on migration, the discourse on labor migration. But also we have a joint program that is called Joint Labor Migration Program, where we are working with ILO, we're working with IOM to advance the labor migration policy work, both in Africa, but we also work with also our counterparts from other regions in Europe and GCC. But we also have developed the guidelines on bilateral agreements so that we can build the capacity of member states of the AU as they negotiate bilaterally, because on the main AU member states, AU or the Africa is a sending continent. So as we negotiate, we've got these bilateral agreements, guidelines that provides capacity for member states as they negotiate the labor agreements with other countries. But also AU has developed the guidelines on a migrant welfare program, which we think it's important because it provides the guidelines on the welfare program. So you can see that our program is more focused on the protection of the labor migrants. But Madam Moderator, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to speak a little bit, but also to appreciate the the fellow panelists, particularly from the GCC, who have talked about the new and emerging policy frameworks and the shifts in the paradigm shift on the policy related to labor migrants, because we have well documented what we call sometimes human rights violation of most of the labor migrants that have gone into work in the Middle East, to work in the Gulf countries, and therefore, in closing, we will make a call. What is our call? This is a call to AU member states, but this is a call to the GCC countries. What is the call? The call is to build and strengthen appropriate rights-based social protection systems that are comprehensive, adequate, sustainable, and inclusive for all workers and this should be reflected in the bilateral agreements that are being developed. But these bilateral agreements should facilitate migrant workers and their families to have equal access to social protection, but also inclusive provisions regarding the acquisition and maintenance of portability of social security rights. When the workers are in the GCC countries, what is the possibility of the portability of those rights when they are going home? When they are sending back home their earnings in terms of the remittances, is there a facilitation for them to send without the system consuming a little bit that they are sending back home? So you can see that our approach is more on the protection of the labor migrants. With these few words, Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to thank you. I would like you to present this call for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to, of course, congratulate the initiative of the GCC. I know very well Director General Alubaidi, whom we work a lot on Qatar, expanding also Social Security. I think this is really an important issue for the construction workers. There's a lot of construction workers in the GCC. So I represent the construction workers. I'm from the Building and Woodworkers International. And if you look at the report of the ILO, I'm looking at the low income level, that the implementation, the effectiveness is lower than the rest. No? That's what I represent. No? And many of the construction workers are in vulnerable situations. So construction is a high risk, and construction workers are pretty much vulnerable. So I'd like to thank ILO. I want to comment on the ILO report. I like the report, no, because you go beyond the legal aspect. You look at the effectiveness, and maybe from there we can see the legal gaps. You know, I think this is important. No, that's why I think I would like to look at the legal gaps, so the effectiveness gaps, and see how we can still expand. I think there's no doubt that the direction now is in the GCC is to extend social protection for all, including the migrant workers. So I think that's the agenda. But how? I think that's a challenge. In our industry, we are basically impacted by four shocks. No, so you have the pandemic. We know that during the pandemic, construction project has been done. Workers are sent home. No social protection. Of course, you have the health and safety, accidents, but you have to go beyond that. The health aspect, the occupational health, that the impact to you is including when you already went home. You know, you are not paid only on the time that you got sick, but if your sickness is more permanent, then there should be a mechanism for that. No? So the economic, well, with the pandemic, construction's been down. Many construction work also stopped in the middle, and many companies said, "Sorry, there's no project. Go home." No. And one of our experience, many construction workers are working with subcontractor. If the major contractor payment is delayed, it goes down. So then you would say, oh, it's illegal, it's not social protection. Well, it's social protection because you file a case and then the case would take a longer time. So you are a migrant, you don't own a house in that in the country, you know. Where do you live? Where's will your income come from? So these are important consideration if you talk about social protection. And then you have the climate shock also, heat, flooding, etc. So for us, social protection must cover everyone without discrimination, regardless of nationality, gender, employment status, or immigration status. Gender, you have seen the enforcement there. The gender is very low, no? So I think that's very evident in the report, no? So there should be no discrimination. Employment, the question, should we only provide immigration status, provide social protection for those who are legally staying? How about those are illegal or undocumented? And many undocumented is not because of they want to be illegal, but because of the illegal recruiters, no? What is the mechanism for that, no? Of course, they would be afraid to go to the office and claim for that, and then the immigration will be chasing them, no? So this is really important consideration. Many workers like that in the issue of 1 minute now. So the another issue that we want is really to work on a more effective mechanism. For us, the most important is cooperation, participation with the trade union and with the migrant workers. Why? There are many, we have a lot of very good consultants, but very nice mechanism for implementation. But if you bring it down, no one knows it. People cannot access. I think the migrant workers, the workers knows better who needs to be covered, and they knows better how best it can be implemented. So I think let's have more involvement, let's have more cooperation. One message: solidarity is fundamental when we talk about social protection, and the state is important, has a important role to play. The question for the states now in the GCC is how can you promote solidarity in social protection that would ensure the vulnerable sector, those who have less are covered by this social protection system. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yuzon.
Thank you for having me in this session. I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of the private sector, and we've got 5 minutes left in the session. Thank you. So there is clearly a significant and very, very exciting trend of increasing social protections for migrant workers in the Gulf countries right now. And employers in the private sector are generally embracing this substantial shift towards providing for more social protections. And there are many reasons why employers would want to support this. Firstly, obviously, it's the right and responsible thing to do, but it's actually enshrined in most organizations that want to be successful and sustaining within their HR policies to have equal pay and benefits for equal work, and equal treatment regardless of background, gender, nationality, etc. So this is a very key point, and it contributes to ESG goals, which are, again, increasingly focused in on right now around the world. Secondly, having strong social protections in place means that the attractiveness of any destination for top talent increases. And in the world we live in, where there's a global competition for talent and skills shortages, which are well documented, in order for destinations to be able to attract the right talent, there has to be the right level of protections in place. And actually, over the years, we've seen that happen in the Gulf countries, becoming far more attractive places to work from for talent from all around the world. Thirdly, it helps create a level playing field to a great extent, because in the absence of appropriate legislative social protections, the employers that have to actually fill in the gaps incur the extra costs to do so. So in order to have a level playing field, even within business, employers would advocate strongly for increasing social protections. And of course, finally, the last point, there is, social protection provides for happy workers, productive workers, of course, and that plays a significant role as well. So in general, the GCC's approach, I'm going to try and summarize my comments here because of time, but in general, the GCC's approach towards implementation must also be called out for the effective use of technology. We saw it from the UAE's unemployment insurance scheme as to how an easy access to subscribe to the insurance was created through online portals or service centers that offered the service for those that were not so literate. So this kind of implementation, followed by social media campaigns and outreach programs, achieved significant results. And you see it in other systems as well. For example, the wages protection scheme systems, which ensure the mandatory ensure that payment of salaries is made to all workers. They're all technology-led platforms that enable very smooth and efficient implementation, because it's really important not to create additional bureaucracy as a result of the protections that we're trying to create. Looking at health insurance as well, across the region, largely mandatory private health insurance is there. Having that baseline minimum is excellent, and most employers, or many employers, actually go beyond and provide better benefits, which again feeds into those same outcomes we were talking about in terms of better employee engagement and retention outcomes. We've seen the prevalence of self-sponsored residence status in the GCC. We've seen the golden visas in the UAE. The green visas are the next category coming up. We've got Saudi Arabia's premium residency scheme, all of which completely decouple employment and immigration status. However, I must also say there was a comment in the ILO report around the kafala system and the employer-sponsored issue. And I think we've moved very far away from a sponsored-led relationship in the GCC. We're now much closer to what we would, as the employer community, see as employer-employee relationship administered by an employment contract. And there have been great strides made in that respect in terms of portability of jobs from one employer to another, the removal of things like NOCs and exit permits. So a lot of progress has been achieved, and it's very positive to see that. Another aspect that's been discussed is the end of service benefits. I think that's really important, the work that's happening in the region. I think the employers will highly support this, because if you ask any CFO or anybody in the finance function, how nervous it makes them to have big liability building up in their books. It's a much better system to have to pay into a fund on a regular basis and contribute towards that. And again, this is there is change. The Dubai International Financial Center have been running the dues scheme for the last 2 years very successfully, and now it's being expanded as a voluntary scheme in the UAE, and others have also passed legislation such as Oman and Bahrain as well. So this is all very positive, and it would help employers better manage their liabilities and costs, especially in God forbid, in instances such as pandemic or something like that. So I think the other aspect is the change management. It's been talked about here as well. I think there's a lot of things that need to be done, continually done, to reinforce the message that the workers who have those social protections can understand that they have them in the first place, have the awareness, and that they are able to utilize those benefits easily as well. So there needs to be continuing work. As with any change, changing the regulation or processes doesn't create that change overnight. It takes time and effort and sustained effort towards ensuring that the change is successful. So I think that's going to be very important going forward as well. Again, final comment, just to wrap up, that these recent reforms and social protections will definitely support the overall objectives relating to economic growth and diversification of the GCC countries. Because in this diversification and in this level of growth, we do need to bring and attract and retain the talent in the region. So thank you very much.
No time for questions. But please give a good response to the panelists. They have given a lot of good inputs and reflections. So thank you, gentlemen, for all the wonderful inputs.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks to all of you. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to the moderator. Thanks for this very open conversation and these insights that you have presented. A lot has been achieved, and I think we can be proud of that. A lot of work still has to be done. Out of the COVID-19 pandemic and its tough consequences, both in the GCC and in the countries of origin, actually we came up with this idea together with ODI and the ILO to commission this research, which has given a lot of insights and I think also a good basis for sustained progress. There are a few things which still need to be fostered further. Sustain, of course, the positive reform. Make sure that the most vulnerable categories of workers, and we've seen it in the numbers, are included and benefit as well. This, of course, also includes workers, domestic workers in households. Then also explore, and thanks for the last intervention by the private sector, explore also the best ways of public-private cooperation and complementarity schemes to ensure this inclusion for all in social protection. And then eventually, and we've heard it from the African Union, ensure portability, exportability, which is absolutely crucial. In this context, I have the pleasure to announce that Switzerland will support a new initiative on social protection across the GCC and the South Asia corridor. And we look forward to this new step, to this new program, to the progress. Big thanks to the ILO, ODI, the Executive Bureau of the Council of Ministers of Labour and Ministers of Social Affairs in GCC states. Thanks to the Migration Forum Asia, and well, thanks to all of you.